Well, hello, hello.
Hello, hello for episode 14.
For those of you that don't remember, my name's Leanne. Nice to see you again.
And for those who don't remember me, I'm Jason. Nice to see you again. And this is Let's Talk.
Sorry, the bit of background noise came through then. I think I had another screen open. But this is a space where we discuss all sorts of topics and nothing is off limits. We'll go through well-being and resilience, leadership and money, relationships and mindset, and all with a foundation of neuroscience, because that is our sweet spot.
Absolutely. And as always, we bring different perspectives to our episodes of real stories and honest conversations because the things that we don't talk about often are really the things that matter the most that we need and want to talk about.
Yeah. So our goal here is simple. It's really to spark new ideas, maybe shift your mindset, and give you practical tools that you can use in your life and in your leadership.
So, whether you're tuning in for inspiration, growth, or just a fresh perspective, let's talk.
Let's talk.
So, today we're starting with something almost everyone is experiencing in some form: pressure. This episode is called Your Brain Under Pressure: Why Stress Hijacks Your Brain and how to regain clarity, energy, and control in your life. Because stress isn't just something that you push through, it actually changes how your brain functions, how you think, how you decide, how you connect with others, and how you cope. So, today we're going to unpack what stress really does to the brain, why it hijacks clarity and your energy, space, and control. And most importantly, how to get yourself back. Because pressure doesn't mean that you're failing, folks. It just means that you're being human.
Human doing this thing called life, right? That's love that. So we're going to start today by reframing stress because stress is not a personality flaw or a lack of resilience. Stress is something that's a biological response, and it's your brain and nervous system responding to perceived threats in your environment. And neuroscience explains why this happens and things that kind of occur for us when we're under stress or when there's pressure around us. So the first thing is that your brain's number one and primary job is survival. It is to keep you alive. It's not to make you happy. It's not to look for all the joy. It's scanning the environment for stimuli multiple times a second, trying to ascertain what's a threat, what might kill me, what do I need to fight, and all of this sort of stuff. So it's consistently looking for threats in the environment. And the amygdala, which is kind of the limbic region of the brain, it's all different kind of parts of the brain, but that region scans and detects for threat all the time. The hypothalamus, which is also part of the limbic, activates the stress response within our body. So if it notices something that is stressful, our hypothalamus kind of sends out this alarm and warning, going, warning, Will Robinson, warning, warning, there's stress in the environment, something's coming to hurt us. So this is our brain's natural biological response to stress. It's actually not a bad thing. It's just something that we need to learn to manage. When that warning system goes off, the brain then secretes or just pushes out a whole lot of chemicals. There's lots and lots of neurochemicals that flood our body, but the two that are probably most known are cortisol and adrenaline. So cortisol is the stress hormone, and adrenaline is what gets us moving, right? It gets your heart pounding, it gets your blood kind of flowing to your extremities. So stress and the brain can create some great things. So anything that we can do without thinking, we can lift things that are heavier. We can type emails faster. We can drive faster. So all the things that we have kind of automated, things that are habitual, we can do better under a stress response. But if we need to do our executive functions, our thinking and things like that, that can sometimes be impaired by a stress response. But what I want to say is that the limbic system sends out these warnings, and all the resources are taken away from that thinking part of our brain. Well, not all of them, but a big proportion of them. So the ability to be able to use our prefrontal cortex goes out the window. And I think it's Amy Arnstein calls that part of our brain Goldilocks, because the conditions have to be just right in order for it to kind of work effectively. So we really need to navigate this. And there's a TED talk that we're going to recommend at the end of this podcast to listen to. But stress in its own self isn't actually a bad thing, because it is our body's way of preparing us for what's coming. So it's actually biologically a good thing. But what we think about stress is the issue. So we really need to be mindful about our beliefs around stress. And we'll talk more about that as we go through. But I just wanted to kind of highlight that. So stress in itself isn't bad. But if we believe it's bad, then it is bad. So the same as we always say, whatever you believe is true. So check your beliefs. We say this all the time.
Yeah, and just a reflection on that, Leanne, is it's not that we're weak. It's that our brains are doing exactly what they are evolved to do. And like you said, is to keep us safe. It's not like, hey, let's go out and party and this, that, the next thing, but it's how to keep us safe for that survival. So the problem isn't stress, it's chronic stress without recovery. And I think folks are really going to enjoy, and it's not a long TED talk that we'll talk about it, towards the end. But it's that reframe that they give that is the magical piece of the puzzle. So we'll get more into that a little bit later on when we get to that portion of our show. So I'll turn it back over to you, Leanne.
Why, thank you, Jason. So as you said, it's chronic stress. It's when the pressure stays high for too long, the brain shifts priority, right? It shifts priority. It shifts everything that it does. So it's not that we shouldn't feel stress. It's that we're choosing to feel stress all the time. And I say choosing because it's not necessarily things that are in the environment right now that are causing us stress. It could be memories of the past. It could be, hallucinations about something that's going to happen in the future. Like this idea of chronic stress really is the issue. And when this pressure stays too long, our brain really does suffer, right? It fatigues because that prefrontal cortex, as I talked about, this thinking part of the brain, is the part of the brain that allows us to make decisions, to inhibit our natural responses. It allows us to understand information. It allows us to memorize things. It allows us to recall things that we have got in our storehouse of memory. It also is the part of our brain that allows us to plan things out, prioritizing. It's where empathy sits. We can't have empathy necessarily if we're under constant stress. Although stress makes us want to connect because we are social beings to a degree, it also reduces our ability to be able to put ourselves in somebody else's shoes because we assume every stick is a snake. We assume that, everything is bad. We kind of don't look at this one thing. It becomes pervasive. It becomes everything. So our perspective also shifts under a threat state, and our ability to be able to function at our best goes offline. And all of us want to be at our best, right? So the limbic system takes over and it prepares us. It prepares us for that fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response where some people will get hyper vigilant and hyper controlling and hyperactive and, really super focused. Whereas others are like, the lights are on, but nobody's home. I can't actually think. And anywhere in between there, right, we could land when we're under pressure and under stress. So we need to be mindful of this limbic response. But rather than beat ourselves up for it or give ourselves a hard time because, oh God, I've done that again, actually befriending the stress, actually saying thank you for the warning signals, I've got you, and actually taking
Mm-hmm.
responsibility for what's going on is really the thing that we can do. Because under that fight, flight, freeze response, and I think I spoke about this last week in our podcast, we can't think in the moment. It's often later that we think, oh, I could have said this and I should have said that, when we're no longer in that fight, flight, freeze response. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but in the moment, we're kind of just like no words, can't think, can't formulate stuff, can't come up with any good ideas. And as a leader in an organization, we need to be mindful of this. Like if you're walking into a room, that could create a threat state for your team. So then getting them to, brainstorm and come up with great ideas amongst everybody else isn't necessarily a good thing to do. Sometimes they're going to think better later. We also become quite short-tempered when we're under a threat state, right? Like, I don't know for you, Jason, but for me, like my fuse gets much shorter. I get annoyed quicker and much reactive. Now, I may suppress that if I'm in the workplace because, you can't go around ranting and raving when you're at work. But, you go home and then you yell at your kids or you kick the dog or something really ridiculous, right? Or, that piece of Lego that you stand on and you erupt because it hurts. Lego really hurts when you step on it. But secondly, you've been suppressing this emotion all day in the workplace, and then it's got to come out somewhere. So we need to find strategies to navigate and to be able to turn the dial down on that. We also get tunneled vision. Literally, under a threat state, our perception narrows. We don't have the peripheral vision that we normally have. So we physically see fewer opportunities. We see fewer ways of getting out of the state that we might be in. And that, if you think about that from a workplace environment, if we're under stress and we're literally reducing our field of vision, there's a whole lot that's happening that we just don't even have access to seeing. So, and we get hyper focused on that one thing. We don't see all the other things that could potentially be going on or could potentially be opportunities for improvement. And we get emotionally flooded. You can feel it. It overtakes your body. You've literally got all of this chemicals going through you. You can feel it. And then we're trying to suppress it, which makes it escalate even more, which isn't ideal. To give an example of this, I remember once being in the shower and having an argument in my head with somebody about something that hadn't happened yet. And by the time I got out of the shower, I was enraged. Like I was so angry. And it wasn't a real threat. It hadn't happened yet. I wasn't even having a conversation. It was all in my head. And this is part of the things that we need to be mindful of. Are we actively choosing stress by ruminating and having these thoughts of the future? Or are we actually just meeting what's in front of us and dealing with that, which if our body then reacts in a threat state, that's good because it's actually helping us to get through whatever it is that's in front of us. But if it's thoughts, memories, emotions, and visions of the future that aren't here yet, then we need to be really looking at that. That's why when we're under pressure, we say things we don't mean, right? Because we've got all of this stuff going on. Words come out, we're not thinking about it. Our decisions, well, we can have decision regret. Like we make decisions under a threat state and then we kind of look back later and go, well, that wasn't necessarily the best decision. I wish I had thought that through. And we actually feel like we're not ourselves. Like we actually feel like there's an alien almost that's invaded our body and taken over. And then when we come back into baseline, we go, oh, that wasn't how I wanted to show up. That was actually pretty ugly. I didn't like that. So we can have these responses under a threat state. And the other part is cognitive overload. Like we can feel that our brain is just maxed out. Like I can't take on another thing. I can't actually handle noise. I don't know about you, but if I'm hyper stressed, there's so much noise in my brain that any external noise feels like too much, right? Like my brain is cognitively overloaded and I physically
Mhm.
have to go into a quiet space to try and calm that down. So all of these things can happen to us under a threat state. And like I say, it's not necessarily that it's bad. It's just how we're navigating it and the story we're telling ourselves about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And just, just especially in today's, uh, uh, I always call it like today's contemporary world that we live in, right? And just, and we've talked about this too, right? Like around the attention management piece, right? How so much is capturing our attention. Um, and, which can cause, like, if you don't respond to it and know how to take a step back and like just kind of turn off, the lights in some of the rooms or get certain people off the stage, like it can just be so overwhelming. And it's like your system is running with so many tabs open, and I have a fault of that on my own laptop, right? So many tabs open. And sometimes I look at it and I'm like, I know where everything is, but I'm like, there are moments where there is just that overload of like, oh my God, like I have like 50 tabs open. So, and when you're experiencing cognitive overload, um, it's your brain is processing. It is processing so many things. Think of it like the constant notifications coming in, right? I mean, and sometimes like that can just be like, oh my God, like I'm stop, stop with the notifications, especially when you're trying to like get something done. And then it's like buzz, 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 buzz. So, and that alone takes away and I forget the percentage. I think it's like 15 to 20% of your actual IQ, like as notifications come in. Like let's say you're working on something and then a buzz from your cell phone comes in. It takes away from that IQ level. Um,
Can I just
there's a
say something to that, if I can?
Yeah, absolutely.
There was a study done by Middlesex University that confirms that if you're focusing and a buzz comes through, it diverts your attention away. It has the same effect on the brain as working like you're stoned,
Yeah.
right? So, we're trying to do all this good work and we've got, these things that are taking our functions away from us and we're actually working like we're impaired.
Yeah. Yeah. And some of the other ways that your brain is processing when you're experiencing cognitive overload is also decision fatigue, um, emotional labor, unresolved stress, you know, um, and also lack of rest, and I think a lot of these also speak into our past series on well-being, right? Like what are some of the well-being areas that you can actually infuse to help with when your brain is under pressure, right? Whether it's doing the box breathing or getting up to eat a healthy snack, to renutrition yourself or to go out for a walk. So I think there's things that can be married from last series into this series. um, and also kind of think about that the brain doesn't prioritize importance, it prioritizes urgency. And I think there's a lot just within that statement that what may be important isn't what is prioritizing, but is prioritizing urgency within the moment. Um, so a lot to think about kind of in that area of cognitive load and how to kind of think about it like when you're experiencing it, and remember it's your brain processing all these different areas that I just spoke about.
Yeah. If I can double click on one of the ones that you said there around decision fatigue, I think this
Mm-hmm.
is a really interesting one because, again, as leaders, we have to make decisions. And
Mm-hmm.
if we've got this decision fatigue, we're going to err on the side of caution. And that may not necessarily be the best decision. There was a study done on Supreme Court judges who were issuing parole for inmates. And they found that they were much more lenient in the morning than they were in the afternoon because
Mhm.
of decision fatigue. So in the morning, they would be granting more parole to people. But by the afternoon, because of the decisions that they had to make, they actually then were keeping more incarcerated, which is really, if you think about it, it's not based on the merit of the inmate. It was actually because of the cognitive overload of this decision
Mhm.
fatigue, right? So as leaders, we've got to make decisions all the time. And if we're in that overwhelmed stress state, we are going to err on the side of caution. We're going to
Mhm.
take the less risky option, even though the more risky might actually be the better option.
Yeah.
But because we don't want to because we're under this threat state, safety becomes so important that we end up making the decisions that feel safer, regardless of whether it's actually the best decision for the task that we're performing. So I just wanted to double click on that because, to talk about decision fatigue, it's like, okay, we all get decision fatigue if we're making too much decisions. But if we have to continue making decisions when we're fatigued, we aren't going
Yeah.
to make good ones for that reason. Um,
Yeah.
we're going to make
And
safe ones.
it's interesting that you say that, Leanne, too, because I was talking with my older sister yesterday after work, and um, we were talking, and she had made this joke like, oh, like, I realized that I can juggle 240 things in a day. And it was interesting. And I'm like, well, what do you mean by that? And, she was like, well, I was in meetings from like, I think it was like 7 in the morning till 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And, but then, every time I needed to step out to use a restroom or whatever, it's like somebody was waiting for me. It's like, I couldn't get a moment of just for a moment just to kind of think and be. And so what I bring that up for any leaders that are listening is that, like as you're planning out your day or planning out, long days of meetings, whether they're in retreat format or strategy sessions or whatever, to make sure that you design in moments where people can get up, get out, get something to eat, hydrate themselves, maybe go for a walk, or kind of change the scenery maybe of of where the morning part of the meeting is to the afternoon part of the meeting, because there's a lot of decisions in those long meetings, and that decision fatigue just is there, and sometimes people don't even realize it. So like I think it even in the examples that you were bringing up about like the Supreme Court judges too, it's like strategy decisions that you're making about your own business or corporation or whatever can also be affected negatively, possibly, if you're in that decision fatigue state.
And that, just as you were saying that, the other thing that comes up for me as you were discussing that, Jason, is, the whole idea of multitasking,
Mm-hmm.
right? We're juggling multiple things all the time and we think we do it well. But research has shown that you actually make more mistakes and do things much not so well when you're multitasking. Like having single pointed focus is the better option. But if we've got
Yeah.
all of this stuff coming in at us all the time, it can be you know, quite taxing for us. And we are going to make careless mistakes. It's like, if you're talking on the phone and you're typing an email, you end up either saying what you're typing or you type what you're saying. You can't actually do two things at once if you're required to think about. So your task switching, which is then really fatiguing for the brain, it's like a mental marathon. So
Yeah.
all of this increases our pressure and our perceived stress level because we're juggling so much of this. The other thing,
Yeah.
and the other thing that stood out to me there is also, under pressure, we are going to be more inclined to lean into people that are like us. So this whole idea of diversity and inclusion becomes more of a challenge,
Yeah.
because it feels safer if we're like cookie cutter versions of the same thing than if
Mm-hmm.
we've got to kind of work a little bit harder because it is diverse. Even though we know that having more diversity and inclusion is actually by far the better team. again, there's research on multiple companies, and what they've come to realize is that their profit margins are so much higher if there are
Mhm.
more women and diverse ethnicity within the organization. Like financially, they come up with better ideas, solutions that actually impact, like social impact is much better,
Mhm.
and their profit lines are much better. So we need to have that. But when we're under pressure all the time, we almost resist that because it feels hard. So again, just being mindful of these things. Was there anything else? No, I think that was it. That was all I wanted to say about that. Oh, no, there was one more thing. You talked about all the dings and pings, these digital distractions that come in, and we have spoken about this before. But for several years now, my phone remains on silent all day. It's on silent. I just don't have the dings and pings anymore. So I don't put it on do not disturb because, I want to, if things come in, I can see them, but I just turn the volume off on everything. So I don't hear my phone. So when I'm focused and when I'm working, I'm not being diverted away. I'm not necessarily getting the stoned brain because I'm looking at my phone because it just pinged again. So anything that you can do to support yourselves is really what we need to manage here. It's our attention, it's our energy, and it's our cognitive resources because let's face it, the truth is in today's society, there is so much stress. Some of it is our own, our work, our family, our issues and challenges, the mortgages, this personal kind of place where we all suffer some stress. But then there's the global stress, right? This
Yeah.
collective stress. And even though we may not consciously be concerned about what's going on, that mirror neurons pick up on the energy that's around us. So we are at a higher baseline of stress. We're starting from a disadvantaged point just because of the collective stress that's going on. And we don't need to go into details about, all of that, but it doesn't matter where you sit in the world, there's something that's a concern, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's, RSV, this new whatever it is, whether it's, what's happening in different war zones, what's happening in your part of the world, like there's so many things that are occurring. And even if it's not directly affecting you, the stress levels subconsciously are.
Yeah.
So we need to be kinder and more empathetic to people because of this. So the next topic I wanted to, sorry, before I go into burnout, is there anything else that you want to say?
Just the only one thing I wanted to take on there, Leanne, too, is, like another level where people are experiencing stress or reacting to stress or reacting to stress of stress is through social media.
Yeah.
And so, it's not like, it's just the stressors of what's coming at us in person, but it's also what we see on social media. And, the immense amount of notifications and dings and pings and, and all that. And, depends on what groups you're a part of and, different, dynamics, whether they're political dynamics, family dynamics, financial dynamic, whatever. There's so much in addition to respond to on social media. So, and I think that's part of the part of the part of the problem in a way that it's so hard to like fully disconnect. It's like almost the only time you really can is when you sleep.
Yeah.
Um, unless you are intentional about it. Like, I think that's a great strategy, putting your phone on silent, not on do not disturb, but on silent so that it's not this constant overload, just because I just see so much just, both in a positive way and in very high levels of stress waves, reactions coming out on social media. And it's just I say that just to give people like an additional awareness to think about, is also think about the cognitive overload that's occurring via social media as well.
And as we know, right, it's clickbait. So whatever you look at or stop at or pause for more than like 3 seconds, they're going to keep feeding you the same thing. So whether it's positive or whether it's doom and gloom, you're getting saturated by that.
Yeah. Yeah,
Like saturated.
absolutely.
Like seriously saturated. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is this concept of burnout because, it doesn't matter how many people I coach, they're all kind of talking about feeling burnt out. And it even, just general conversations that I'm having everywhere, burnout seems to be the hot topic. People are feeling burnt out. And there can be two kind of ideas around what causes burnout. It can be your nervous system is exhausted, like really nervous system depth of exhaustion. Like that's one aspect of burnout because it's prolonged activation of this stress state without any kind of measures to bring it in or to stop it. But burnout can also be, and this is recent research that showed up, a perceived lack of autonomy or control, right? Can cause burnout. Insufficient reward or recognition for the work that we're doing can cause burnout. This idea of a perceived lack of social support or community,
Mhm.
being isolated can cause burnout, and a perceived lack of meaning or purpose. And the reason I wanted to share that is because most people think burnout is because I'm overworked. I've got too many things to do and I can't keep up. But it's not actually that because think about it. When you're doing something you love, you could be working 20 hours a day and not feel burnt out.
Mhm.
But if I'm doing something that I don't really have choice over, I don't really have any control over, I'm not being recognized or rewarded for it. I'm isolating, or because I'm under pressure, I'm not leaning into my support networks. I'm not being social. I'm not doing that. They're the things that generally drop off the edge if we are running on the treadmill. And I don't really feel like I've got meaning. Like that's what causes
Mhm.
burnout, really. And then when we're in that burnout state, it is that nervous system exhaustion that shows up. Like we can sleep, but we don't feel rested, right? And I don't know if you've ever done that. Like you wake up in the morning and you're still exhausted because your whole system is just going, I am not coping very well here at all. So, some of the symptoms of burnout, even if you might not think you're there or if you're not sure, these are the things to look out for in yourself or people around you. The first one is brain fog, where it just is taking me longer to do stuff. I can't kind of
Mhm.
think as well as I normally would. I can't articulate words. I might stutter a bit more than I usually do. Like, really, like this whole idea of brain fog shows up. And it just means that we're not performing at our optimal. Like, there's just
Mhm.
something, and I can't quite put my finger on it, but I just don't feel like I'm performing at my best. I can't make decisions. So oftentimes we avoid decisions when we're burnt out and when we've got brain fog because that just feels too overwhelming. So these are sort of the telltale signs to look for in yourself or in others if you're considering that maybe I am burnt out here. And oftentimes people don't know that they are until they hit the wall, right? And their whole body shuts down and then they go, oh my God, I'm burnt out. And it takes them months to recover. So if we can notice these subtle signs and signals before they become extreme, we can kind of put strategies in place before we hit the wall because hitting the wall is not fun. And I'm sure we've all been there. For me, my body shuts down. I get sick. I end up with some flu or some something if I'm getting
Mhm.
to that point. And if I don't listen, then things escalate. So you've got to pay attention, listen to the whispers, notice the subtle signs. The other one is emotional numbness. Like it's almost like, got nothing. I'm hearing you. I can see what you're talking about. I should be feeling something, but I've got nothing. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever been in that position, but that's really not pleasant because I'm a highly empathetic person. And I think most of us are high empathy, right? And then all of a sudden it's just like, we
Mm.
get this emotional numbness when we're burnt out and when we've got this kind of stress and pressure state happening. And we don't want to be like that. We want to be connected. We want to be caring. We want to be empathetic. We want to stand up and show up, right? Not just to be numb and unemotive completely.
Mhm.
So that's another sign to look out for. Irritability. I mean, we talked about this before, but that short fuse, being irritable, little things that would normally not bother you start bothering you. people say something and what normally, you'd normally brush it off or laugh it off or give a jab back, all of a sudden it becomes a big thing and we personalize it. We get really irritable. And other people notice that often before we do,
Yeah.
right? So if you're noticing irritability in others, maybe it's time to have a conversation with them and go, hey, are you okay? Are you feeling burnt out? Like, what's going on here? Because again, we see these things in other people much easier than we see it in ourselves. We often have blinkers on to our own stuff. And we need to take the blinkers off and actually see what's going on. Lack of motivation. So it's almost this apathy, like I just can't be bothered. I don't want to do that. Like you kind of roll out of bed with no motivation to get into your day or to do anything, even the things you enjoy. When you're at that burnout phase or when you're, in such a stress state where your nervous system is responding, even the things that
Mhm.
normally bring you joy no longer do that. Like you have
Yep.
lack of motivation for everything, not just the things that, like work or whatever. But, I can't be bothered going dancing. I don't want to hang out with my friends. I don't want to, go and have a drink. I just can't be bothered. So motivation everywhere, and anywhere. And like I said, that deep sense of exhaustion that sleep just can't fix. Like it doesn't matter how much you sleep, you're still just constantly exhausted. And these are the things that show up. And, I've had them. And I'm sure, Jason, you've had them
Mhm.
too, right? And you look back in hindsight and go, oh God, I wish I had have picked that up earlier and done something about it.
Yeah.
So we've got to kind of open our eyes and be really aware of these things for ourselves and those around us. Because if we don't see it in ourselves until it's too late, most other people aren't either. And the kindest thing that we can do is hold up a mirror and go, hey, are you noticing this in yourself? I'm concerned about you. Can we have a conversation?
Yeah.
Um, and that is really what we need. We need community support under these circumstances of high stress and pressure.
Yeah, it makes me reflect on, like one thing, like kind of when you're in that burnout stage, right? And, you know, I mean, how many people sleep with their phone right next to them, right? And so when you're talking about that motivation, sometimes it's just so easy to pick up the phone, just starts kind of still laying in bed, scrolling, but it's like you're really not doing anything meaningful, but it's just that you're so, that you just instead of like, oh, I need to make that phone call, but my phone's in the living room and I need to get up and do it, to get some movement and brain activity going and all that. Um, so I think, that's just something else for us all, me included, to, maybe not have your phone right next to where you're asleep. You know, just because even when you wake up during the night, sometimes too, you like pick it up and start scrolling. So um, but within all that, Leanne, it made me think that people often think that when you're in this area and stage of burnout, that you need a holiday, but it's actually very much more deeper than that because you can't rest your way out of a nervous system that doesn't feel safe, right? So, because your brain needs those signals of safety, not just time off to sit by the pool and, drink a martini. So that's nice too. But, from a pure neuroscience point of view, your brain needs those signals of safety, not just the time off from work or life or whatever. So I want to talk for a few minutes about some tips on how to regulate your nervous system.
Can I just say
So,
something about that
yeah,
holiday piece before you
yeah.
move on? I had a boss years ago. He's no longer on the planet. He's gone to the other side. But he used to say to me, whenever I go on holidays, I need at least 2 weeks. He said, because the first week I get sick because my body finally starts to relax, and allows, and then, the burnout and the fatigue and all of that stuff kicks in. And
Hmm.
then the second week I can actually have a holiday. And I just kind of looked at him and thought, wow, that's really interesting. And this is before I understood the neuroscience and all of this stuff that we talk about now. And I was just like, wow, that's really interesting. And I noticed that that started happening to me when I was working in really high pressure jobs and all the rest of it. And then the second week of holiday, you're enjoying it. But 3 days before you have to come back, you start not enjoying it again because all of a sudden it's like, oh God, I've got to go back in 3 days. I've got work. Right. So and because we don't feel safe, because we haven't actually created those safety mechanisms within us in relation to the nervous system, right? So,
Yeah.
although holidays are fantastic and we need them, and I actually often say to people, factor in holidays a few times a year so you can recharge because sometimes we are just fatigued, like, and we need
Yeah.
to recharge and we can show up better as ourselves with holidays. But if you're in that state of burnout and fatigue and you're getting sick and all the rest of it, there are other things that you need to do. So, I just wanted to highlight that because I think we often do think a holiday is going to fix it, but you're taking you, the burnt out you, on holiday. So,
Yeah.
you're not
Yeah.
leaving that part of you back home. And all of those concerns, those fears, those all of the stuff that's causing the stress and the pressure comes with you as well.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
Yeah. Because it makes me think even like, when people go, even if it's out for 2 weeks over like the Christmas and New Year holiday, you're so on the go. And it's just like you're so exhausted by because there's so much that happens during that time. It's almost, I hear people all the time saying, oh my gosh, I need a week after the 2 weeks just to just to relax, just to
Yeah.
recharge,
You
just
need a
to
holiday to recover from your
from
holiday.
the holiday.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, so 3 tips that we can provide you on how to regulate your nervous system is the first step is to name it. The fastest way to reduce stress is not just fix it, but it's to name it. And why is naming it essentially important? One, labeling emotions helps to reduce amygdala activity. So think of it, I'm overwhelmed versus something is wrong with me, right? Because sometimes, and I've been there too, like I'm in a state of overwhelm and I'm like, oh my God, like what's wrong with me? Like, am I the only one that's feeling this? And it's like when you take a step back, when you have that awareness, be like, no, like I'm just like overwhelmed. Like, and what tools do I have in my own toolbox to help bring my overwhelmness down?
And they often, you, name it to tame it is a quote. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's Daniel. Oh, his name will come to me in a moment. But, he's coined this name it to tame it. But the other thing that I've heard is name it to contain it. So we can contain it so it doesn't expand, right? Which is what often happens. Like it becomes pervasive and it's everywhere and it's everything. So if we can name it, it helps us to just compartmentalize it and keep it in that state, or it turns the dial down. And it's not name it and then go into the story and explain it. And then because that will just trigger more of the negative emotion, but it's just being really articulate about this is what I'm feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And the second we do that, we can feel relief because it's out there, right?
Yeah.
We've said it. Um, and it works really well as a strategy. It's why you often see mums in shopping centers where kids are on the ground and they're screaming and chucking a tantrum, and the mum will say, use your words because it reignites this cognitive, the prefrontal cortex part of the brain. It takes the resources back to here out of the emotional center. So it
Yeah.
allows us to start thinking. Another thing that they often talk about in the emotional intelligence space around name it to tame it is do something that you need to think about. So it might be count backwards in Italian, right? If
Mm-hmm.
Italian's not your first language, or I'm going to start thinking about every state that I can think about, or every country that starts with I, or whatever, but
Yeah.
something that actually makes you think and bring your resources back to the thinking part of your brain. So naming it to tame it is the first step that allows you to reignite that prefrontal cortex. So I just wanted to kind of double click on that because it's so important. And we often think if we speak it, it's going to make it bigger and worse, but it doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and two things that came up when you were talking about that, Leanne. Um, is, and I remember bringing this up in one of our well-being series. It might have been our mental well-being or our intellectual being. I think it was mental well-being, I think. But, like when you name it to tame it, right? Then you have a clear space to say, this just is what it is.
Mm.
And I don't need to react to it.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's like, no, it isn't what it isn't, and I do need to look into this. But that naming to tame it, I think, helps. The way I visualize it, it helps center.
Yeah.
It kind of brings it back into like almost into focus, like when you have your glasses off or your contacts out and you're like, oh, okay, now I can see this clearly and kind of out of the fog. And then you can be like, it is what it is, not necessary to react to it. Or it may be something that you need to have a little reaction to. And then when you were talking about emotion intelligence, I was talking to this professor, I believe it was last week, and around emotional intelligence. And he said, he was like, I have a very simple, his name is Dr. Thomas Joseph. And he was like, I've developed this definition on emotional intelligence that's not academic, that's not theory, it's just plain and simple and short. Be intellectual about your emotions. Don't be smart about your emotions, but be intellectual about your emotions. And that just rang kind of something different for me in the area of emotional intelligence, because there's a lot of academic definitions and theory definitions out there, and they all have their own weight. But it was just a simple, clean way to think about in the moment, like, okay, am I being intellectual about my emotions here or am I not? Yeah.
Yeah. And you've got to notice it, you've got to name it, and then you've got the clarity to be intellectual about it, right? Because,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so
Absolutely. um let's see. Okay, and our second step and tip on how to regulate your nervous system is to regulate before you reason. So what do we mean by that, right? Breathe. And I know we've talked about the box breathing many times in different episodes, and I think that box breathing is super simple, and it's not something that's you have to like sit and think about, but it's easy to remember if you do it enough. So, do that box breathing. Also, do a grounding exercise. And that could just be as simple if you're sitting, right? Like put your feet in the floor and name 5 things that you see. Or put your feet in the floor, or if you're standing, close your eyes and name 3 things that you're grateful for. Just that grounding can also add that focus and that putting on your glasses or contacts or your readers if you need the extra help there, to really to help yourself get in that regulation zone before you start reasoning everything out. Is there
and
anything additional you want to put in there?
yeah, grounding is a really interesting one because it has some profound impacts, right? It can actually make you feel like you're standing more
Mm-hmm.
solid, like with both feet. So one of the things that I like to do to ground is just envisage, a stream of light coming through me, through to the ground, and then into the center of the earth. And then having energy come up from the earth through me and then out the top. And you don't have to do that for very long. And I know it sounds a bit woo woo, but it automatically just calms the nervous system after box breathing, but you just feel stronger in your body. And because when we're stressed, usually we kind of fold in on ourselves. Our shoulders come in, we shallow breathe, we get smaller. So, this whole idea of standing and grounding, and actually, or envisage that the earth is kind of holding your feet to the ground, like you've got roots
Mm-hmm.
kind of holding you there. It allows you to stand wider, to take up more space. And the other thing in relation to grounding is get outside. If you can do it on grass or something, even better. Like, and I know better is not a word, but it's a Leanneism. Right? But if you can kind of take your shoes off, and go and stand in the grass for a few minutes or in the water. Really, really, really grounding. There's something about water that just kind of helps the nervous system for most people, not all people. So if you can get by a body of water, a lake, a pond, a pool, anything, it can help just calm your state. I think it's really important to think about that. And that box breathing thing, I have done it in meetings where my eyes are open and I'm completely present, but I'm actually doing box breathing to regulate myself. If I've been spoken over, or if somebody's kind of, belittled me or something like that. So
Yeah.
rather than react, I've been able to kind of just start breathing and then I can respond much more effectively. That's using my intelligence, my emotions intellectually. So if we can find these strategies that gives you a little bit of a pause, and allows you to kind of feel better about yourself, then it's worth it. It's so worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. And a couple of things to add on there is, the stretching and movement. So, like if you are close to a body of water, you know, that movement helps you get to that body of water, to stand in that grounding, maybe even doing some stretching, while you're doing your grounding exercise. And to think is that, you cannot think your way out of stress. You must regulate your way back to thinking. And, I think that's important for people to kind of think about is that, you have to regulate to get back to that cognitive space of clear thinking. And then the third tip that we have is to reduce your cognitive load. So we talked a lot about your cognitive load earlier, you know, um, in the space of overload, right? So we encourage you, in this space, to have fewer decisions that you have to make, right? Externalizing tasks, put in healthy boundaries with technology. You can go even back to, I believe it was episode 11 in our well-being series on digital and technological well-being. We have a lot of great tips that we brought in there to help you have how to use tech more smartly and not make it a trap, but actually make it a good companion for yourself. So putting in those healthy boundaries is a good practice. And also white space. So those are kind of three tips with some tools and practices that you can put in place to actually help regulate your nervous system back to a healthy operating space. With that, I think, Leeanne, unless you have something else you want to put in there, we can move over to our resources and top tips.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, let me
Just while you're doing that, that externalizing tasks, the more things that we're holding on to in our mind, the less able we are to think properly. So get things out of your head and onto paper, post-it notes, to-do lists, that sort of stuff. Because if we're trying to remember all of those things, we're using those cognitive resources, which can have us actually feeling even more stressed. But if we
Yeah.
get it out and put it onto paper, one, we're not going to forget what we need to do, so we don't have to stress about forgetting. And secondly, we're then freeing up our cognitive resources so we
Yes.
can actually do what we need.
Yes, that old pen to paper,
So important. So important.
Exactly. Okay, so do you want me to talk about top three tips and then you want to do
You
the
just did
resources?
that.
Oh, yes, we did. So, so a little surprise is that the top three tips to regulate your nervous system are the top three tips for you to take along with you today. So I'll just go over them really quickly, high level. First one is name it, acknowledge the feeling to begin managing it. Two, regulate before you reason, calm your body's response before engaging your logical mind. Because we all want to go there. We all want to go to the logical part, but you got to pay attention to your body's response before you can actually be in a healthy logical space to logically think through things. And thirdly, reduce cognitive load, simplify tasks, and focus on essential information. So, I think, Leanne, you just gave a great one right before we merged to this top 3 tips slide is pen to paper, put things down. I know it's so easy because we just have a little computer in our hand, but that is one way, but also another way too, where you don't have to continually tap on your screen to, re-engage the technology, is just have it right there, right beside you. And it takes away so much more stress. So you can check it off, cross it out. And, there's that positive response in your body of accomplishment.
And the other thing I want to just add to that, there is a real mindfulness practice about finding the space between the pen and the paper and focusing
Mhm.
your attention there. It's a mindful exercise. So, the old school writing allows us to be more mindful. If we're scrolling or typing, we don't have the same capacity to be able to do that as well.
Yeah.
But if you can focus your attention on where the pen meets the paper and actually just put your attention there, that in itself is a mindfulness process or practice that calms the nervous system too. I just want
Yeah.
to add that in.
And I think too, when you think about it generationally, Leanne, like, I don't have kids, but I have nieces and nephews who are your kids' age. But I think it's part of our responsibility as Gen Xers, because we were born without technology, but technology was merged in fairly soon into our lives. Is I think it's our responsibility with our generation, because we have um, that emergence of the two, to really teach that to the younger generation and the importance of it, versus the rolling of the eyes of it, right? So I think that's, any Gen Xers, listening out there, to the additive that Leanne was just talking about. I think it's important. It's a good thing that our generation can pass on to the younger generations.
Yes, yes. I think our generation has had to adapt and pivot pretty well through all of the changes.
Yes.
And I specifically buy my kids' journals every year, for that reason. And I don't care whether you draw in it, whether you scribble in it, whether you write the F word 100 times on one page because you're frustrated. Like, it doesn't matter, but just pen to paper helps us to regulate and calm. So, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So there's a couple of resources here that I wanted to speak to because they're both TED Talks, but both of these speakers have books also. So you could actually double click and buy the book if you're interested. But the first one is How to Make Stress Your Friend by Kelly McGonigal. And this is a fabulous TED Talk because she really talks about how stress is actually a good thing. It's actually our body preparing us to do what we need to do. It's what we think about stress that makes the impact. It's a 15-minute TED talk. It's worth watching by all means. And if you like it, you can go and then further invest in either listening more about her or in her book. I haven't read the book, but I really did enjoy this TED talk. The second one is by Robert Sapolsky, and we've mentioned Robert a few times. He's a interesting character. There's a couple of TED Talks that he's got. One of them, Jason and I listened to and went, "Whew, that's a bit heavy." Very,
Yes.
very good. But he gets right into the nitty gritty of biology and why humans behave the way they do. But this particular one, The Psychology of Stress, is a 3-minute TED Talk or a 3-minute YouTube video. It's a really easy one to watch because he really talks about the difference between us and the animal kingdom, and why we've evolved, but also the trappings because of that involvement. And one of the things that he talks about is an animal will stress for 3 minutes. Am I being chased by the lion? And the lion is stressing, am I going to be able to catch this to eat dinner? It's a 3-minute stress, and then they let it go. We take on a mortgage, and then we have 30-year stress. Right? Like,
Yeah.
and that's in our head. It's not physical stress. So, if we can navigate these things. So, Robert's got several books also, I've noticed. And I think we've actually referred to some of his books previously in some of our other podcasts. But both of these are very, very short, sharp, but worth watching. So, they're our resources this week.
Yes, and we will put these links into that will accompany the video on our YouTube channel under the video tab.
Yes, yes.
So next week's episode, can't believe that we're already on episode 15 already, is going to be all around the EQ, which is emotional intelligence advantage, emotions as intelligence. So we have a lot of rich conversation there that we're excited to dive into, as well as, amazing resources and videos and books and all that we want to align you with. And again, that will be Wednesday, February 11th, Los Angeles, USA, 2:30 p.m. Pacific time. And it'll be Thursday in Sydney at 9:30 a.m. in the morning. So we're excited for next week's episode. And if you can join us live, amazing. If you can't, we hope that you watch it on our channel when you do have a moment.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. These are our next episodes, as we'll leave this screen up just so you can see what's coming for a moment. So I just wanted to kind of close this out by saying, pressure isn't a sign to push harder. Stress is not a sign to push harder. It's a signal to listen deeply to your body, to make some changes, to understand that this is actually something that's helping me, but am I actually using it effectively, or is my mind making up stories for the sake of it and I'm just doing stress and pressure without the necessity of having to do stress and pressure? Because your brain under pressure isn't broken, it's just communicating with you. And reflection is what we need to do, right? Like build in a practice of reflection so you can actually look at what's going on under the scene. So a couple of things that I just wanted to share, ask yourself, where am I carrying unnecessary pressure or unnecessary stress? Am I thinking about something that hasn't even happened yet and worrying about it for no reason? Because let me tell you, everything that's ever happened, you've been able to overcome because you're still here. No amount of worry helps, really. So the more you can free your brain up, the more you can respond effectively in the moment. So, where am I carrying unnecessary pressure or stress? The other one is, what is my nervous system asking for right now? Like, what do I need? Do I need to get up and walk around? Do I need to go and have a glass of water? Do I need to move my body? Do I need to name something that's going on? But what does my nervous system need right now? Maybe it's a couple of rounds of box breathing, whatever it is. But asking these questions, reflect and ask. And the other one that I really love is, what would safety look like? Not what would success look like, but what would safety look like for me right now? And then, factor that in and do what it takes to make yourself feel safe. We can't always feel safe, right? There's things that are going on externally all the time, but what's within my control that I can feel safe with right now? So there are three questions, to ponder, to think about as you're navigating this thing called life.
Yeah. And, what it makes me think about is, protecting your cognitive capital, right? So that you can maximize it. So if there's one thing to remember from our conversation today, it's this: clarity doesn't come from pushing harder. It comes from restoring safety. So, like I said, protect your cognitive capital, because when you use it strategically and mindfully, you're going to have less pressure and stress throughout your day. Like we said, in the next episode, we'll explore the EQ advantage, why emotional mastery is one of the most powerful skills you can build as a human being. And understanding your brain changes how you treat yourself and others.
And we want to treat ourselves and others better. Let's face it. We all just want to treat ourselves and treat other people the best that we can.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And just be kinder, more compassionate human beings, and, always thinking the best for humanity. So with that, Thank you, as always, for joining us in for today's conversation on your brain under pressure, from overload to clarity.
Yeah. We hope it sparked something new for you, a new insight, a fresh perspective, or even just a new thing that you're going to try and implement for yourself, or a question worth exploring. There's all sorts of stuff. But we hope it's given you something that you can take away and find useful.
Absolutely. And as always, our mission here at Let's Talk is simple: to have the conversations that matter the most, and to remind you that you don't have to figure out this thing called life and all of its complexities alone. We're here to have the conversations beside you.
Yeah. So if you enjoyed today's episode, share it, like it, tell other people about it, and continue the conversation with us.
Because when we talk,
We really talk.
and anything is possible,
So let's talk.
with real conversations.
And limitless possibilities. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. See you next week.
See you next week.